Impact, the place where we are going to break down what is happening right now. We are going to talk about all the organizing that is happening all over the country. We're going to talk about strategies as we prepare for Trump to take office in less than 2 weeks. Just a little bit of housekeeping before we get started. First, this is going to be a mostly Q&A session. We'll do a little bit of an opening recap of the world as we see it, what we're thinking about right now, where Indivisible is and where we came from. If you have a question, you can ask, or you should type ask, and then what your question is in the chat so that we can get it. We have some folks on hand who are capturing all the questions. We're not going to be able to get to everyone, but we will do our best to try and cover a lot of the stuff that's got energy. This will be recorded. It will be sent out to everyone who registered. We have a lot of links that we're going to be dropping in the chat. Those will also be included in the recording that goes out to everyone. So if we mention something and you're having trouble finding it in the chat, do not fear, it will come to your inbox. We're going to be doing these every Thursday for January, or every Thursday at the same time for this January. We will see if there is appetite to do more based on how folks are enjoying them. Just as a reminder, why do we do these chats? Well, Indivisible is a people-powered movement. Our strength for nearly 8 years has been about that combination of local leadership and ownership and national support, coordination, partnership. We are strongest when we are in community together. This is one of the ways we try to build that community. We also do focus groups, we do surveys, we do trainings, we do evaluations and one-on-one, but these kinds of real live discussions to spread knowledge, get to alignment, hear what's on folks' minds is is one of the ways we move together as one indivisible movement. With all that said, I want to issue kind of an important top line. This is a period when emotions are running high. Lowercase d democratic spaces like this are by their nature messy. That is totally cool. We're good with that. But please do your part to keep the chat box positive and productive and solutions oriented. We are a diverse nationwide movement. We treat each other with respect, especially when we disagree or are frustrated or scared. That is foundational to our ability to organize together. And then finally, before we get started, I just want to note that we're thinking of everybody who is in Los Angeles and in Southern California today. We've all seen the horrifying images. We've all been checking on our own friends and family. We've all seen the despicable effort by Trump and MAGA forces to go on offense in California because it's a blue state and spread misinformation. We're all thinking of you. We are hoping you're safe, and we're just holding you in our hearts today. With that, I want to turn it over to Ezra. Ezra, do you want to introduce yourself?
Oh, sure. Hey, everybody. I'm Ezra. One of the co-founders of Indivisible, along with Leah. We are married. That's why we're in the same house together right now. My background is in anti-poverty policy and advocacy. Worked on Capitol Hill for a member of Congress for several years. Worked on his campaigns. Was doing anti-poverty advocacy when Trump was elected, and that gave way to now 8 years of working with Indivisibles around the country after Leah and I wrote the original Indivisible guide a little more than 8 years ago. And just actually a quick note on Indivisible. If you're new, welcome. There are a lot of new Indivisibles now, and that's awesome. For folks who don't know, we are a nationwide movement organization. That's what Indivisible National is. That means we have a movement made up of locally led Indivisible groups all over the country. There are 200 new Indivisible groups that have formed since the election, which is awesome. And we also have this national organization that supports and works with this movement of locally led groups. So that's what I help run with Leah. We help lead that organization. But the beating heart of this movement are the groups on the ground that are led locally, owned and operated locally. Okay, so with that, Leah, actually, do you want to introduce yourself?
Oh, sure. Hi, Leah Greenberg, also co-founder, co-executive director of Indivisible, also married to Ezra, if you didn't hear that earlier. So we referenced something about, being closer in the same place. That is why. I also got my start working on Capitol Hill and then in the State Department, where I focused on a combination of foreign policy and human trafficking. Worked with a coalition of folks who were doing human trafficking advocacy in relation to Capitol Hill after that. Really my heart is still very much in that work.
Oh, I see, Jacqueline. So people are asking you to slow down speaking. That is a great plug. I speak too fast all the time. I think Leah and I both do. That's part of this is we're really hopped up on coffee right now and caffeine, so we will try to slow it down a sec. And most of this, as Leah mentioned, is going to be Q&A. It's back and forth. We got hundreds of questions ahead of time, so we've categorized those into kind of buckets of questions that I'll try to go through. But we'll also have time for Q&A that's coming in live. So we'll bounce back and forth between questions that came in early, and if you're here, questions that you're saying, ask, here's my question, and we'll do as much as we can get to in the next hour. Before we get there, I want to cover a little bit of where we are in this political moment and what we're doing. Indivisible is here to fight this fascist clown show of an administration and Congress. We're working to limit harm, stop what we can, stall what we can't stop, and to win back some amount of national power over 2025 and 2026. We are at the heart of it, we are pro-democracy Americans doing what we can where we are to build power and use that power to actually affect things in the real world. Now, we're talking online now. Love that we have Zoom to connect us, but this is really not an online movement. We're old-fashioned. Early in Indivisible's history, I remember seeing this great sign that one of the local Indivisibles made, and they put it in their window. It was from Bayard Rustin. He's this famed civil rights strategist and tactician. He said, or the quote said in the window, "We need in every community a group of angelic troublemakers." I love that. We loved it so much we kicked off one of the chapters of our book a few years with that. So we, Indivisible members, we organize in our own communities where we live. We're not all going to be angels, but we are all going to be troublemakers. Specifically, we're going to be pains in the butt to those MAGA forces that are attacking our communities, or those folks who should be on our side, these weak-kneed electeds who should be on our side, but instead of fighting back, they're capitulating. Some of us, we play defense. Some of us play offense. Some of us focus on federal where we have leverage. Some of us focus on state or local where we have leverage. But our bias, regardless of where we're focusing our energy, our bias is towards democracy and action. We're not just about consuming political content. We figure out what we can actually do about it. So that bias towards action, that's local group-based action. Another last quote I'll give you, and I've said this a lot because it's been ringing in my ears since the election. It's from Timothy Snyder, this historian of authoritarianism. He wrote on tyranny, and he was interviewed shortly after Trump won in November. And responding to what do we do about this new authoritarian threat, he said, "They want you to be alone. Nobody is going to fix this alone. That's not how this works. That's not how this works." So we at Indivisible, we're not just sitting on our computers by ourselves signing a lot of petitions. That's not what we do. We are working with people in our communities to build power. We call that an Indivisible group. They are volunteer founded, led, owned, operated. Local groups range in size and shape. Some of the strongest ones, they were a couple people, a couple friends got together and said, "Yeah, let's create a logo and start a new local." And now they're an Indivisible group and they got hundreds of members. Our locals sustain us during times of crisis, but they're also how we aggregate that power. And that power over the last 8 years has moved mountains. Last thing I'll say, because I'm a nerd, I use the word power a lot. You'll hear the word power a lot if you're in organizing circles for the first time, and you'll just hear that thrown around. I like to define my terms. So I think it's very simple, but I'm going to tell you what indivisible means when we talk about quote unquote power. Power is just the ability to get someone or some institution to do something that they might not otherwise do. That's all power is. Switching an elected's vote, forcing the elected to hold a public meeting, replacing that elected with somebody better, or preventing harm to members of your own community that an elected or some institution is targeting. That's power. And that's what we're building and aggregating nationally with Indivisible. Okay, I swear I'm going to get to Q&A. That's where the bulk of this is going to go. But I do want to cover a couple of points from my most recent newsletter that went out on Saturday, and maybe it was Sunday. And if you don't want to read that, you should really check out Leah's interview with Chris Hayes on Tuesday. I think I saw someone in the comments there. Sorry, Jacqueline, I will slow down. I saw in the comments so a lot of people saw it. I thought she did a brilliant job explaining what is Indivisible's orientation, what is possible in this moment, and how can we unify Democrats against the threat. So really highly, highly, highly recommend you listen to that podcast from Chris Hayes, went out on Tuesday. But in short, what I covered in the newsletter this weekend, which overlapped with what some of Leah covered with Chris Hayes, is this debate that we see playing out, not in MAGA circles or Republican circles, but in the Democratic aligned or the nonpartisan circles. And it's this debate about, should we be courageous in this moment or should we capitulate in this moment? And we've seen several examples of capitulation over the course of the last several weeks. Uh, February 2017, Trump had just gotten in office, and the Washington Post adopts this bold new slogan: democracy dies in the darkness. Democracy dies in darkness. That's what the Washington Post adopted as their slogan as Trump was just inaugurated. Fast forward to 2024, their billionaire owner vetoes the paper's endorsement of Harris and then turns around and donates $1 million to Trump's inauguration. It's not just media, though. We see Biden himself, who ran a forceful, truthful, powerful campaign against Trump, which I think accurately described Trump as a dire threat to our democracy. Those are his words. And then days after the election, we see Biden in this photo op welcoming Trump to the Oval Office and saying, and this is a quote, "We'll do everything we can to make sure you're accommodated." Is that what you say to a would-be authoritarian who's about to take power? Then you see Democratic electeds, folks like Tom Suozzi, who Indivisible's helped elect, who writes a big op-ed saying we've got to find compromise with President Trump's agenda. And Eric Adams in New York City, who's bending over backwards to try to get a pardon from Trump, and even some progressives like Ro Khanna, who's lending credibility to Trump and Musk's attempt to give major handouts to tech billionaires. And most recently, earlier this week, I'm sure you all saw Mark Zuckerberg, who's not exactly a paragon of virtue in the realm of democracy, but he went from booting Trump off of Facebook to announcing what is in effect a total surrender to Musk and Trump's post-truth era of social media. That's a lot of capitulation. That's a lot of scary stuff. And it's not what we would like to see right now. But I want to reassure you all, this is not new. This in some ways feels very similar to late 2016 and early 2017 when we wrote the original Indivisible guide and when we published it. I think there's a common misconception out there that Indivisible or the broader resistance started the day after Trump got elected. He was elected and suddenly, boom, we're off to the races. That's not what went down. Here's what happened that forced that got Leah and I to actually write the Indivisible Guide. One was, yes, the heinous promises from the future Trump administration. They were talking about the Japanese internment camps during World War II as a model for what to do with immigrants and Muslims and refugees. So that was awful, but that's not what kicked off the resistance. What then happened was an interview with then and now incoming Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer, in which he said, well, we lost the election. That happens. But we're going to find a way to work with Trump. Maybe on infrastructure, we can pass a bill together. That's what kicked us off to actually write the guide because we were appalled at the incoming Trump administration's promise. But we were shocked to see that Democrats weren't immediately saying, no, we can oppose this. So yes, part of the battle here is to weaken the resolve of MAGA and the GOP coalition to prevent them from doing things. But the other part of the battle is helping Democrats find their spines and telling them that we expect them to fight back. It's not an automatic result of us living in this new political reality. Democrats aren't just going to automatically do it. It took overwhelming pressure. And the way I see it, the crux of this is, do you think Trump is more like Reagan or do you think he's more like Mussolini? The Democrats campaigned like he was Mussolini. They campaigned saying he was an authoritarian, a would-be fascist. And I campaigned as if he was an authoritarian and would-be fascist. I believed him, and I think Indivisibles believed Trump when he said he wanted to be a dictator on day one. And if you looked at the Democrats' messaging, if you looked at their campaign ads, they believed it too. But what we see right now is kind of a rudderless Democratic Party after the election. We see a fair number of Dems and institutions just treating him like Reagan, a popular but Republican president who they don't love, but they can bargain with. They can figure out a way to get along with him. Instead of treating him like an authoritarian who's the very biggest threat to our democracy. And I would point out that unlike both Reagan and Mussolini, this guy isn't even very popular. But that is the crux of it. We believe this guy is actually a threat to our democracy, and efforts to empower him are dangerous for our democracy, and we should be fighting back. And an alternative to this kind of capitulation is what we're seeing among indivisibles right now. We have had, as I mentioned, 200 new indivisible groups form in just about every state in the country since the election. And what they are forming to do is to figure out how to organize and fight back where they are. Maybe it's local, maybe it's state, maybe it's federal. And look, I think there's a strong moral argument to be fighting back against the attacks to come, but I don't think you need to be a bleeding heart liberal to adopt the strategy of saying no to Project 2025 and saying no to creeping authoritarianism. The fact of the matter is, the agenda to come is not popular. If your only goal in life is to take away power from the Republicans in Congress, you should be adopting a strategy that unifies Democrats against that agenda. And the reason why I believe that is because that's exactly what we did in 2017 and 2018. We unified Dems against the MAGA agenda and built the largest midterm margins in the history of the Republic. That's what we got to do again. So my prediction, and we're going to get to Q&A now. My prediction is that as we brace for impact for what's to come in the coming weeks, we're going to see a lot of divide and conquer attacks from the administration and Congress. And they're going to follow a model that looks something like this. The MAGAs are going to say, look at this unpopular or less popular group. This is a problem. We got to address this problem. Two, in order to address this problem, we've got to expand state power. We need to expand state power. We need more unilateral power for Congress or for governors or for the administration to go after this group. And then they're going to use that power to do a lot of harm. And here's where the strategic pitfall comes. Here's where the question of courage versus capitulation comes. Democrats fall into capitulation when they agree with that premise. When they say, yes, Trump has the right idea. Let's work together to address that problematic group, rather than putting their own premise forward. So, namely, saying that this autocratic con man who is seeking to hurt you and your family and community is a danger, and we should not give him power. We're going to see these attacks on trans kids. We're going to see these attacks on immigrants. We're going to see these attacks on protesters. So we can choose to capitulate and side with them, or we can firmly say no. We're on the side of no. We're not going to let them divide and conquer us. We're going to treat an attack on one like an attack on all, and we're going to stand indivisible against these attacks. Okay, we made it. Let's do some actual Q&A. Let's do some Q&A. Okay, we got several categories, and I've been talking a lot, Leah, so I'm hoping that you'll take the lead answering some of these. So we got several categories of questions. I'm just going to tell you what's coming. A set of questions on taking action, a set of questions on the incoming administration and 2025 actions, a set of questions on messaging, set of questions on group growth, health and strategy, and then a lot of miscellaneous questions. So as I said, I'll try to bounce back between questions that came in ahead of time and questions that are coming in live. So if you've got questions, put ask, the question, and we'll try to get to as many as we can. So first up, we got a couple questions, one from Bruce in California, one from Stephen in Maryland with a similar question about confirmation hearings. Bruce said some confirmation hearings on his nominees are starting very soon. Which ones should we contact our senators to oppose and why? Stephen asked, how should we oppose the worst of Trump's nominees? Leah, do you want to take a first whack at this?
Sure. So I would lay down a couple of markers. The first is that we should be expecting a very high degree of democratic alignment across pretty much all of these folks, right? There is a very dangerous tendency in moments like this for some set of Democrats to kind of lean in and start trying to demonstrate their own bipartisan credentials by validating some of these people. We're seeing this with RFK Jr. right now. There have been some troubling signs that Democrats are going to take his nomination seriously as opposed to dismiss it as appointing a malevolent crank con man, for example. And so what I would say is you should be contacting your Democrats and asking them to hold firm on this broader standing strong opposition approach in general. I think when we talk about the most dangerous nominees, when we talk about kind of who are we most concerned about, where do we think we have a chance of taking some of these people down, right? Because, there are 53 Republicans, so we want to be real that a lot of these folks are ultimately going to get confirmed. So some of this is about who can we stop from getting confirmed? And then some of it is about what is the story that we're telling about the people who are actually gonna get through, right? So when we talk about people who we think there really is a shot at maybe knocking them out and preventing them from getting confirmed, that's folks like Kash Patel, like Tulsi Gabbard, like Hegseth, like RFK Jr., some of the most kind of out there, visibly unqualified, visibly dangerous, visibly problematic nominees, places where we think we can fracture, not we both hold together Democrats, but also fracture the Republican coalition. So definitely a set of people where we think there's a real chance. But then across the board, we also got to think about the storytelling potential of even some of the people who are likely to get confirmed. So this is going to be a cabinet of billionaires for billionaires, right? We are looking at the richest cabinet in history. We are looking at an enormous number of very, very wealthy people who are not qualified for the positions that they hold, that have real power over the lives and experiences and well-being of real and regular people. We got to use the confirmation hearings as opportunities to draw that out. I think, again, this can all kind of get down the memory hole, but Betsy DeVos, remember when she was first nominated, she was just a rich lady from Michigan. And then there was a confirmation hearing where it turned out that she could not answer very basic questions about the mission of the Department of Education and went off on a weird tangent about bears. And suddenly she was Betsy DeVos, right? And we were able to tell that story for the next 4 years. So thinking about the confirmation hearings, both as the place where we can take down some of these most dangerous nominees, but also an opportunity to tell the story of an out of control kleptocratic cabinet that's going to facilitate and enable Trump's corruption and lawbreaking.
It's great. And actually, I saw a question come in from Andrea or Andrea, sorry if I'm getting it wrong. What can people in blue states do that's effective to stop dangerous cabinet nominees? I do just want to call out one thing they could not do, which is actively voice support for these nominees. We saw Jared Polis in Colorado, governor of Colorado. I have a generally positive opinion of Jared Polis, and yet he came out and said, "Hey, RFK Jr., I could probably get along with that guy," and was actively voicing support. There was a big campaign in Colorado to push back on him, but he really dug in his heels. So if you've got a Democratic governor, if you've got a Democratic attorney general, if you've got a Democratic state legislature, make sure that they're not saying positive things about Trump's extremist nominees. That's a good first step.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Like I just to reiterate, and just to underscore Ezra's points, a lot of this starts with Democratic unity and Democrats telling a clear and consistent story. So the very first step is not even splitting off those four Republicans. It's making sure the Democrats are united because we're not going to get those four Republicans necessary to stop any of these votes if Democrats don't hold firm.
Exactly right. Uh, Another question came in ahead of time, Leah, from Steve in Pennsylvania said, what are some good methods to re-engage former members who are tired of the fight?
Yeah. It's a good question. It's a good question. We know people are going through a lot of emotions right now, right? There are a lot of folks who worked their hearts out in 2024 after working their hearts out for a really long time before that, and who are frustrated and sad and maybe taking a pause right now. And I think the first thing I would say is that is okay, right? Like some people are going to need a break and then they're going to come back in, and that's okay. And so part of it is just, making space for and validating and giving people a little bit of time to to feel their grief, to take that vacation, to focus on what they need to do to rest and come back into the fight. But then the other thing that I would say is I think we can think, particularly because we are an in-person movement, about what brings people in that's maybe a lower ask or a lower lift ask, or what brings people in that might not be immediately taking an action, but that gets them back into community with each other. So we've heard from a lot of folks who have been doing purely social gatherings during this time that are really just about getting people back face to face with each other. I can't remember who did the unhappy hour out there, but shout out to the group that held the unhappy hours over the last couple of months. But, really just thinking about what can you do to get people back into a social community and forming those ties that you can ultimately use to re-engage them when the time is right.
Leah, I saw a comment in the chat. I think this is a good question because it hits on a strategy and tactical set of advice that we often give to folks. Jenny asked, can you talk about how/why it's detrimental when Dems say they'll work with Trump?
Yeah, absolutely. So what I would say overall is we have a pretty good body of evidence that suggests that when there's collaboration across kind of like bipartisan formats, to the extent that that's ultimately accredited to someone, it is accredited to the president. It sort of validates their overall frame. So when you have a bunch of Democrats, and I'll take this example right now because it's live and in the Senate, We've seen multiple Democratic senators this week coming out and saying some version of, Trump, like we lost because of immigration, so I'm really, I really want to lean in and work with Trump on X and Y thing, and saying that they're going to vote for this very, very dangerous bill, the Lake and Riley Act, that's going to come up in the Senate shortly. This is an example. Each individual Democrat is trying to kind of burnish their bipartisan credentials, but the collective impact is that they have validated Donald Trump's strength and his frame and his power, and they are giving him more political capital for the next thing that he does, right? In addition to, backing an actually very, very dangerous bill. And they're failing to make this very basic point, which is this is going to be a rapacious, out of control, corrupt, power hungry administration. Why on earth would we be giving them more powers to do stuff without accountability, right? So what I would say is that in general, whenever we're trying to tell a story, whenever we're trying to tell a very clean and simple story, it matters a lot that we've got a collective set of Democrats who are all on the same side, not necessarily even in terms of how we win the vote count, but in terms of how we actually influence the media environment. Is there anything to add there?
Well, I'd add two things. One, Leah, I think you should come to me because
Oh
your sound's
no.
breaking up. So you want to close
Oh
out
no.
and talk
I'll
over
be
me?
there
No,
in a
it's
second.
fine because we're both here. But the other thing I would say is I do think there is this knee-jerk you can come over, Leah. I think there is this knee-jerk response by some Democrats to try to demonstrate that they're reasonable, they're willing to work with anybody. And look, I understand that impulse, but when the other side isn't a Reagan, it is a Mussolini. When the other side is an authoritarian that is actively trying to acquire power and is promising to do truly horrific things, when you say, I can work with them, you're not proving that you're reasonable. You're showing that they're reasonable. And that's what's dangerous. You are giving them cover to do particularly damaging things. And I realize I locked the door so my 4-year-old doesn't come in. So hold for 1 second. This is grassroots, y'all. We're doing it live. Okay, so why don't we move on to another set of questions that came in ahead of time. And Leah has joined us here. She made the walk over. So we got a set of questions about what are effective ways that we can engage on the ground, and there are a whole bunch of these questions that came in. So I'm just going to cover a couple, Leah, and you can take a whack at covering them. So uh, here, Carol from Washington. What is most effective, demonstrations or letter writing? We have Amy from Minnesota who says, what are most effective methods early on in which to invest ourselves? We have Susan from Oregon who said, are calls or letters or emails more effective when contacting our reps? Kathy from Illinois, what can I do at the local level that will have the most impact on the outcome of the 2026 midterm elections? So, Leah, this is like a set of questions about people want to have impact. Right. They want to know what actually works. What are some normal recommendations that you give to folks?
Sure. Well, look, our most foundational piece, which we just got to reiterate over and over again. Sorry for the advanced folks in the team, but is organize locally, right? You have the most leverage in relation to your own elected officials. So think about your local level. Your mayor, your county government, your city government, your state representatives, and your federal representatives, and think about who can you move in a way that helps to block some part of the Trump agenda, that helps to put up the biggest possible fight politically to set the conditions for 2026, that helps to protect elections for 2026 if you're in a place where you're facing election deniers or threats along those lines. And that helps people build and get ready for the midterm elections. That's going to look different in different places. If you haven't checked out Indivisible Guide 2.0, which we released back in November, we really try to go through some different plays depending on where you are, right? Because if you are in a blue city or state, you might find that your best leverage is really about organizing locally to really push your governor, your state attorney general, your legislative representatives on what they can do to Trump proof their state. Whereas if you are in a purple area, maybe it's about pushing a swing district Republican or a swing Senate Republican on their votes in some of these upcoming confirmation bites. But remember, it's always about finding that local leverage.
Excellent. So, got a question in live from Laura asking, can you recommend reliable news sources for news about DC politics? And it's a really good question because it's not as obvious where you should go right now. And it's hard to say always go to X news source because you're always going to get the straight talk from them. My strategy is I have certain journalists and certain op-ed columnists who I do trust who have a pro-democracy bias, and I look to them, but it's not always at the same institution. Leah, do you have some
Right.
favorites you want to mention?
Yeah, sure. I'm a fan of Perry Bacon, of Greg Sargent. I do think that we do appreciate Chris Hayes and Rachel Maddow, obviously, if you're consuming your news in TV form. Um, I think those are some of my personal favorites.
Jen Rubin over at Washington
Jen
Post
Rubin,
also has
yep.
a real a pro-democracy bias as well.
Yeah. I will
Sent.
also
Oh, go ahead.
say, I do think there is some value in carefully consuming media that is not approved in these terms, in terms of reliable news, right? If you look at Punchbowl DC, if you're subscribed to Politico's morning briefing, you're going to understand what creatures of DC are reading that morning. And that actually can be really helpful as long as you read it with an incredibly careful eye and a grain of salt, because it is designed to be kind of the stenographers to power.
That's right. So something like Playbook, which is published every morning, it's not got a pro-democracy bias in the
No
least,
way.
but it is what people on Capitol Hill read or listen to. It's an example of what they listen to just about every day. Folks mentioned some other favorites. I'm just going to call out The Guardian. I think is actually, as far as papers go, a great institution that has a lot of good pro-democracy coverage. Jamel Bouie, phenomenal. Absolutely phenomenal. Mark Elias, excellent as well. We're not alone. There are a lot of good sources out there. I sent out a few newsletters ago. I sent a list of recommendations. And so what I'll do in the follow-up email to this, maybe we'll re-up some of those so we can send them out to everybody. Okay, moving on through, we're still in this taking action category. Um, we got a couple of questions. One from Diane in North Carolina who asks, where do we have the most leverage to block deportations? And related from Michael in New York asks, what can be done to stop deportations? And just to note, some of what's to come is going to be unpredictable. There's going to be a lot of chaos over the course of the next 2 years. We have been thrust back into the position of being in the minority in the House, in the minority in the Senate, and not having the presidency, which means we don't have agenda setting power. They get to decide week to week, day to day, what is on the agenda at the federal level. And some of that's going to be hard to predict, and we're just going to have to respond rapidly. But it makes sense to me that we're getting questions on this ahead of time because it's very clear that one of the communities they're going to target first and hardest is the immigrant communities. So, Leah, do you want to talk about
Yeah.
what are we thinking about when it comes to these mass deportations?
Yeah, sure. Let me talk about first what we know about this, and then kind of what are your options and what is your leverage. So, what we are hearing from our partners in the immigrant rights community is that they are expecting a very dramatic and public set of mass raids, mass detention efforts, kind of incursions into blue states and blue cities in particular by the Trump administration immediately upon taking office. And in fact, CBP, the Customs and Border Patrol employees and staff have already sort of started to jump the gun on some of this stuff because it is an agency of people who very enthusiastically support the Trump mandate under any circumstances. The People can't hear me, huh?
Testing,
Okay.
testing.
Testing. How are we
Can
going?
you all hear? I can
Okay,
hear.
okay, great.
Okay.
Wonderful.
Thanks,
Okay.
Kenneth.
All right. Anyways, so we're expecting to see a bunch of kind of very high publicity, high attention raids in these places. In these places, we think it's really important that there is connected local infrastructure that is telling the counter story, right? Because they're going to go in with their story of like, Donald Trump is tough and he's finally taking action and he's going after all these people. And we have to be able to tell the story of how they are throwing communities into disorder and disarray, how they are disrupting, family ties and deporting folks who have been here for a long time, how they are creating a lot of fear in longstanding, upstanding communities. We got to kind of lean into the impact. And what we've heard from our folks and friends in the immigrant rights community is they really want to see non-immigrant ambassadors who are out there aggressively saying the impact that this is having on them, the impact that this is having on communities, on the economy, making that case and telling that story about how this is really tearing at the fabric as when the Trump administration does this. So it's about chaos, it's about cruelty, it's about disorder, it's about the ways that they are, promoting an attack that goes against both our values and also just disrupts our way of life.
There's going
Now,
to be
sorry, one other thing I do want to add. We really want to make sure that if you are organizing locally, you are doing that in partnership with local immigrant rights groups. They are going to have the most up-to-date information. They are going to know more about what is happening. They are going to be able to deploy you most effectively, and they're going to be able to identify what kinds of things you are most effective in doing. So if you are not connected already, then go ahead and try and reach out and make sure that you are on the list of people that they can reach out to in a crisis.
Yep. Okay, so we are cruising through questions that came in ahead of time on taking action. As a reminder, next one we'll be talking about incoming administration threats and what we do about it. But want to end on a question from Maud in Virginia, and I saw somebody said, "Is there an Indivisible Virginia?" Yeah, there are tons of Indivisible groups in Virginia. I'm going to Fairfax tomorrow to speak to a group of Indivisibles in Virginia. So yes, you can find Indivisible groups in Virginia. But Maud over in Virginia said or asked, how do we keep Democrats in Congress from capitulating to the Trump agenda? Beautiful question, Maud. Exactly the kind of question we like to get. Leah?
Look, it's about the nuts and bolts of local advocacy. You call them, you show up at their office, you watch them like a hawk, you follow up after votes, you let them know how you want them to vote, and then you let them know if they voted that way, thank you. If they did not vote that way, that you're disappointed in them. Democrats really want to be on good terms with their
That's right.
constituents. They do not want bad press. They do not want Democratic adjacent groups, independent progressives like ourselves or anyone else. They don't want those folks mad at them for the most part. They want you to be in there for their next reelection effort. They don't want you giving a quote to the local paper or going on social media talking about how you're disappointing your constituents. So just think about the tools that you have in relation to your own elected officials. Make those calls, get everybody to make those calls, send those letters, ask for meetings, and just continually follow up. Being persistent is the key to all of this stuff, right? They need to know that they're going to hear from you either way next week and the week after and the week after that.
Here, I can show you what just about every Democratic elected in the country is doing right now. We can do it in real time. They're doing this. They're licking their finger and they're sticking it into the wind. They want to understand which way the wind is blowing. Is there more political advantage in opposing and fighting back, or is there more political advantage into demonstrating that they can get along and go along? That's the question. And so you can feed into that political calculus. You have that power. You organize locally and you say, hey, we're big supporters of you, but we really want to see you fight back. Like, why did you vote in this way? Why did you give this speech? Why did you say this thing? Keep your eye on them, keep pressure, and let them know, oh gosh, they're going to be really mad at me if I do X thing, so that they don't do X thing. Get them on your side. You want to be cheering them. You're not out for them just to be out for them. You want to be behind them, but then they need to show up for you. And you'll be surprised how quickly you can build actual respectful relationship with your electeds if you show up and are persistent or paying attention and provide that sometimes, nudge or forceful pushback when they kind of step out of line. Okay, we're going to go on to next section of questions that came in ahead of time around incoming administration actions. Gary from Michigan is asking, are there key milestone events to consider leading up to the 2026 midterms? And we got a long way to go until the midterms, but it is indeed our goal as we move towards 2026 midterms to retake the House of Representatives. We want to do that, and we think we can do it. But that's far away. We're not going to retake the House of Representatives tomorrow. What is happening between now and then that we think are key milestone moments for, okay, we are indeed building our political power?
It's a moving target, but the first one that I would identify is the smorgasbord reconciliation bill that Republicans are going to try to move. And reconciliation is a technical term. This is basically the one piece of legislation that they're aiming to pack all of their legislative agenda that they can fit into in a single bill. We know that they're going to try to do we know that the Trump tax cuts are expiring, and so they're going to try to reauthorize and extend those and increase to that extent the money that they are giving away to corporations and billionaires. We know that they're going to try to pay for that by cutting people's health care and benefits. We know that they are going to try to pack a bunch of other very, very damaging Republican provisions into that legislation. Now, simultaneously, we know that they're going to have between 1 and 3 votes in the House to pass that, which is wild. I want to reiterate, between 1 to 3 votes in the House to pass a massive package that covers their whole agenda in a fractious and, let's be honest, kind of crazy caucus. Now, when we first defeated the attempt to reform or to repeal the Affordable Care Act, they had a 43 vote margin. They have a 1 to 3 vote margin this time. So if we are fighting back, if we are holding Democrats unified so they don't have any margin for error, we can bog that down. We can turn it politically toxic. We can make it just a huge, long, extended mess that they have to explain to the American people every time they go home to their state or to their district. So that's a huge and important moving milestone because it's going to be going over several months over this course of this year. The next thing that I would point out is elections in November of this year, right? We are going to see elections in Virginia. We are going to see elections across in New Jersey. We're going to see a real series of chances to demonstrate exactly how unpopular they are and how they are fueling backlash in a way that scares the heck, if we do it right, scares the heck out of every other Republican who is going to be up for election in 2026. So I know there are people on this call who are in Virginia who are already preparing for those elections in New Jersey. That is going to be a really important moment where we can demonstrate that there is going to be a massive political price to going along with this stuff.
The other thing that I would point out that is also a moving target. It's not an election, but it is a question of how will blue states respond in this moment. So there is a debate happening in blue states right now of are we more scared of Trump than we are in a mode of opposition to Trump? Are we fearful that the federal government is going to take away our funds or target our state? And so do we need to demonstrate that we're actually friendly, or are we going to unify against? And so I think one milestone, or it's a set of milestones that we will be looking out for in the coming weeks and early months of this year is what does the activity in a state like California or New York or Illinois or Washington or Oregon, what does it look like? Those are states where the governor is a Democrat, the attorney general is a Democrat, the state senate is Democratic controlled, the state house is controlled by Democrats. They have the power to proactively push back. Are they doing that? And so I know there's a lot of focus on Congress and the federal government right now for good reason. That's where a lot of the threat is coming from. But there's actually big opportunity to set the stage for what the next 2 years look like in the blue areas. But it's happening at the state and local level.
I want to circle back to one thing that's coming up in the comments, which are special elections that are going to come this spring. Trump has appointed multiple members of his cabinet from out of the House of Representatives. That's part of why his margins are so incredibly tiny. Most of those folks are coming from seats that are generally considered safe Republican. But if we are in a powerful backlash moment, things have a way of getting less safe, right? And so there is absolutely going to be value in competing for those seats, in demonstrating exactly how much of a margin we can make or margin we can score in opposition to Trump relatively early. I think the chances that we are able to actually flip the House are very, very slim in that case, but that does not mean that this is not a fight worth having. And then the other thing that I also want to name, Wisconsin Supreme Court. Folks on this call have been part of the effort to flip and maintain a majority on the Wisconsin Supreme Court over the last several years. This is absolutely crucial for unrigging the gerrymandering in the state. It is crucial for protecting abortion rights. There is another Wisconsin Supreme Court race coming up this spring. We are going to need to go all in on that collectively as a movement because we all know that what happens in Wisconsin matters for all of us.
Yep, great. Got a question from Lee in Maryland. What is the best way to support progressive congressional representatives like Jamie Raskin, who may be a MAGA target? Love Jamie Raskin. I just did an event with Jamie Raskin a month or two ago on January 6th and a new documentary. He's incredible. And I love a question about how do we support our fighters? Because when we talk about weak-kneed Democrats or Democrats who don't get it or treating Trump like he's not an authoritarian, that's not Jamie Raskin. Jamie Raskin understands exactly what this threat looks like and is actively working to prevent damage that would otherwise be done. So, Leah, how do we think about, we both worked for progressive members of Congress when we were Capitol Hill staffers. When you think of what's helpful for a progressive member of Congress, what do you think works?
Well, first of all, I would say where they're active, showing up. And when they tell you that something is important, doing additional work in your own home area that helps to support that, right? So Jamie Raskin is one of a number of people who will be actively campaigning for specific priorities, who will be actively fighting for specific things. I would say paying attention. Where are they putting their energy? Where are they putting their attention? And then how do you push your own elected officials to fall in line behind them? How do you let your own elected officials know you want them to be more like Jamie Raskin and less like, I'm just going to pick an example,
Josh,
John Fetterman,
oh, I was gonna say Josh Gottheimer.
Josh Gottheimer. Okay, great. We got
We've
a
all got our
list. We've
favorites.
got a list.
Swazi, yeah.
Yes. So really encouraging. I think that one of the core ways that you help Jamie Raskin or you help another progressive member who's a real champion is you get them more allies in Congress, and you do that by really encouraging and incentivizing your own representatives to be better.
That's right. On the flip side, Ellen asked in the chat a bit earlier, how can we deal with the House Dems, 48 of them who voted with Republicans on this anti-immigrant bill, the Lincoln Riley Act? She said, not my rep, but I worked hard for 13 of them and am disgusted with them. Uh, this ties back to a point we made earlier. You got to let them know that you're angry with them, especially if they are your representative. This is where focusing on what they actually do, not just what they say, but what they do. What are their votes? What events are they showing up at? What bills are they co-sponsoring? How are they orienting against the MAGA agenda? Focusing on them and providing feedback and saying, hey, I saw that. I don't like it. Please change your behavior. We did this for the bill, if folks were following HR 9495 last year. There were dozens, if not more, Democrats who were on board with this bill that would have given unilateral power to Donald Trump to go after nonprofits he didn't like, to label them terrorist organizations. We were shocked that Democrats, after his election, were saying, yeah, this is a good idea. We organized, we drove 20,000 calls, mostly to Democrats in the House, and we peeled off almost all of them. There were about 15 remainders, but almost all the Democrats voted with us. And because of the way the bill was structured, we were able to kill it and then delay it and then prevent it from going forward into the Senate. So we need feedback for these Democratic representatives. They are not they are not set on their policies that they're going to support just off the bat. You shouldn't assume, oh, my member voted this way, they're always going to act this way. They need feedback. They're going to hear from lobbyists. They're going to hear from their Republican colleagues. They're going to hear from their donors. They need to hear from you. They need to hear from you. You can be an input there and just keep on pushing. That's how this is going to work. And we're going to eventually build into their political calculus, oh, I got to do this because otherwise I'm going to get some upset calls from my constituents.
Yeah, I'll just say, I think it's a pretty big bummer that on a regular basis we have to call our Democratic representatives and tell them that we think it's a bad idea to give Donald Trump more power. But unfortunately, for the immediate future, that is where we are. And the faster and the more aggressively we do that right now, the less time we're going to have to spend doing that over the next few years. Again, this did happen in 2016 and 2017. A lot of Democrats responded to Donald Trump being elected by being like, oh, I don't know, I guess maybe I should be a little more like Trump. We showed up. We said, what the hell are you doing? We need you to fight back. And they got the message. It took a little bit of time. It took some of them a little longer than others, but they got the message. And so fundamentally, with the Lake and Riley Act, with HR 9495, a lot of times Democrats, they're herd creatures. Some of these folks, they see that everybody's going in that direction and they think, I got to go in that direction. Oh, I'm very scared. I'm very scared of, being accused that this bill is, going to be in my next ad or my next attack ad, et cetera, et cetera. And then you marshal a counterforce. You say, have you actually read the bill? Do you understand how incredibly harmful this could be? Do you understand that you are handing Donald Trump and Texas Attorney General Ken Paxton the power to set immigration policy for this country? And they'll go in the other direction if enough of us do that.
That's right. Look, this is what happened in 2017, 2018, like Leah said. This is not a theory of how we can move electeds. We've demonstrated this repeatedly over the course of the last 8 years. It takes work and takes work in these communities because the most powerful force are organized constituents. You might be angry at a member of Congress who lives on the other side of the country. I often am too. I don't have power, and neither do you, to move that member of Congress. But the constituents in that member of Congress's district, they do. They do.
And one thing I want you to have faith in is that if you are not in the district of the person that you're mad at, somebody on this call is, and they are getting organized to hold them accountable.
Great. Going to move forward with some incoming actions, questions about incoming actions. Do we have any idea where the incoming administration will put its initial focus? We covered this a little bit, but Leah, do you want to touch a bit on where do we think the first attacks are coming?
Sure. I will say, I think that what we should assume is that there will be an an onslaught. Let's put it that way, an onslaught. I just want to be really candid. I think that we will see a lot of very dispiriting, very painful attacks in a lot of different directions at the same time. This is the method, the modus operandi of the Trump operandi, I don't know, of the Trump administration is to throw a lot of very, very damaging stuff out all at the same time. And we know that they're pretty organized to do that. So I think we would expect them to make a very big centerpiece of very aggressive immigration enforcement actions. But I also think we should expect attacks on environmental regulation, loosening of regulations that protect consumers. We should expect attacks on reproductive freedom. We should expect attacks on trans kids and LGBT people around the country. We should expect attacks on protest, on the right to free speech, on folks like the Palestinian justice movement. We should expect, just a whole host of attacks across the board on a bunch of the targets that they've already signaled. And then frankly, stuff that we're not necessarily even tracking. I know that I personally was not expecting to spend this much time talking about whether the United States should invade Greenland this week. But unfortunately, they're gonna try to flood the zone, as Steve Bannon has said in the past. I think what's important here is we know that we're not going to be able to stop everything that we're talking about. We know that a lot of these are executive actions, right? Which means that they are within the power of Donald Trump and his administration to do. That does not mean that they don't pay a political price. That does not mean that there are not ways to slow them down or stop them at the local level, in the legal system, in some combination of all of the above. That doesn't mean that there aren't creative ways to try to hold off some of the harm that they are trying to cause and to make the Republicans pay a political price for standing behind Trump as he starts to roll out a bunch of stuff that has nothing to do with what he was campaigning on. And I think we have to remember here, Donald Trump won in part by literally disowning Project 2025, and he is now moving to put the actual architects of Project 2025 in charge of his administration, and they are going to roll that agenda out. And in the pushing back on that, we have the opportunity to pull some of those folks who we lost either to the couch or to the other team into our coalition. And so I think we've got to think in terms of what is coming, but also how do we use the moments that are coming at us, both to try and hold off as much harm as we can and to signal that this kind of damage, this is not, this is not who we are. This is not who we should be. This is not where we want to go in the next election.
Great. I want to go on to some questions about group growth, health, and strategy. We want to accomplish a lot over the course of the coming weeks, coming months, and years. All of that depends on being organized locally. Like the way that we get done what we get done is through local organizing. So we got a lot of questions that came in from folks who are trying to start or lead their Indivisible group. And so let's go through some of the challenges that folks are facing. There are some questions they have. Judith from Illinois says, it's natural to shrink back when attacked. How can group leaders support members and themselves? This is a question that we've been getting a lot from folks around the movement since the election.
You want to take first?
Sure. So one of the things that we should recognize is that part of the authoritarian strategy is to cow you into submission, to tell you it is too dangerous for you to act, so you should stay quiet and stay at home. And that will work if people listen to it and if people do indeed stay home, because then those who are speaking up are more easily targeted. Unfortunately, we can't tell you that everybody is going to be okay or there's no risk involved in organizing or protesting this administration. The fact of the matter is there will be dangers. And I think it's important that everybody engages in this work clear-eyed, that what we are doing right now is pushing back against a would-be authoritarian regime. And would-be authoritarian regimes don't have a rich history of being super nice to those who oppose them. That said, this is why Indivisible's model of organizing is not individual organizing. Our unit of activism is not the individual, it is the group. We have strength in numbers. We build community to wield power, but we also build community to support each other. So if there's one thing that I hope you get out of this call and seeing all the couple thousand people who are on, it's that you're not alone in this fight. That not only do you have the national organization to provide guidance and support and resources, you've got indivisibles organizing all around you in groups around the country. And we need to lean on each other for that support. But Leah, Leah actually wrote this section of the new Indivisible guide that's on security issues. So Leah, you should really lean in here.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, first, I do just want to note, I see a couple of questions about security training in the comments. We have some security resources and we are working on more to be available to folks. So hear you on that. We will make sure that you get what we have already. I think fundamentally we have to be real about the moment we're in. We have to be clear-eyed. It is, the risks associated with activism and the risks associated with protest have risen over the last several years. And also, those risks get greater the more some of us shrink away. So I think we have to lean into the strength that we have in numbers, the strength that we have in community. We have to say collectively, you know, we can't promise that this is going to be, that everything's going to be okay, but we know that if we don't all get involved, nothing will be okay. And then we have to take faith and pride and joy in what we can do together.
I know we're coming up on the hour, and we'll go a little bit long, but I do want to plug a couple of things that are coming up so that anybody who has to drop right on the hour gets it. One is that, as we've mentioned several times now, we know a lot of attacks are coming pretty darn fast after inauguration. So a question is, how do we best respond this inauguration? Now, in what I think is one of the most poetically unjust coincidences, inauguration day, January 20th, is also Martin Luther King Day. Now, Martin Luther King Day is traditionally a day of service. People figure out a way to connect their community. So Indivisible is organizing and has produced resources and a toolkit for how can indivisible groups connect with their community on inauguration. We think the best way to demonstrate that we do not support this administration's attacks on our community is to get super local and say, hey, we're here. We're here to help. Connect with local groups supporting LGBTQ populations or trans kids or immigrants or refugees or other folks who you know are going to be targeted. This is a way to say you're not alone. There are folks in your community who care about you and who are there, and we're here to help, and we're going to be organizing in this community. We'll put a link out. We'll also follow up with an email. We're hoping to have actions like that led by local indivisible groups all around the country, and we're going to be supporting however best we can. The other thing I want to plug, Leah said at the top, we're experimenting with how we engage with the movement right now. We do newsletters and focus groups and surveys and emails and these calls, and we want to figure out what works for you. So we're trying something new in the early part of this year. Every Thursday at 3 p.m. Eastern this month, we are going to be holding one of these Q&A chats where we, at the top, maybe we'll do a little bit less next time, so it's less of a speech or a rally, but we'll do a little topper on here's what's happening in the news, and then spend a lot of time with Q&A, just going through real talk. What are you wrestling with? What's happening in the movement? How can we support you? So that's the plan. Just want to plug that. You'll be able to register. If you can make it, awesome. Submit questions. If you can't, we'll record it. We'll send it out. But we'll experiment. We'll see what works for folks. Like I said, I know we're at the hour. If you got to go, apologies. We always have so many questions that we can't get to everything. But let's answer a few more because we didn't get to a few of the few of the areas that I did want to get to. Okay, here's a very practical question also on the group growth side from Patricia in Washington. Is it useful or counterproductive to have two indivisible groups in one city? I love that question because it just demonstrates how much energy there is out there that multiple indivisible groups are forming in individual cities, which has happened throughout our history.
Yeah. My answer is it really depends. Like some cities are quite big, and having different groups covering different neighborhoods can be pretty helpful if you're actually trying to, get people out for your regular meeting. Sometimes different groups have different focuses or different emphases, and that's totally okay and cool. It's good to talk to each other so that you're, like in touch, you are keeping each other apprised of what you're doing. You can come together when needed if you want to kind of do a collective show of strength. It just depends, I guess I would say.
The important thing from my point of view is less how many groups are there in a city or state and how well coordinated are they. So there are statewide indivisible coordinating groups in about half of the states. And so they are bodies that bring together the various indivisible groups in the community. I think that's really healthy. If you don't have a statewide indivisible group, you could form a city-wide indivisible group that supports different indivisibles from different neighborhoods, or there are indivisible group that focuses on local issues and one that focuses on federal issues. Totally kosher. Or one that focuses on creative artistic action and one that focuses on tracking legislation. The important thing is to build a community that is welcoming, that is friendly, that is feels empowering, and that is fun, that people want to be part of. This can't be a drag. If it's a drag, people aren't going to show up. You got to have dancing, you got to have music, you got to be entertaining and be a place that people want to be part of. This is a people-powered movement. So at the heart of it, we're trying to build communities that, yes, have impact, but the way we get there is they're communities people want to be part of. So that might mean forming another indivisible group for your friends, an extended friend group, and coordinating with the existing indivisible group in your area. Or it might be joining that indivisible group and having a subset group that meets on different issues. You got to figure out what works for you. You're leading this. We're not going to tell you it's got to be X way or Y way. Um, Another question. Oh, this is a great question from Jennifer, because we do get this a lot about the Democratic Party.
Mhm.
Because Indivisible is not an arm of the Democratic Party, and yet we work with a lot of Democratic elected officials and the party sometimes. So Jennifer from California asks, how might indivisible groups most productively work with already existing but not especially creative Dim party chapters?
It's a great question, and I hate that my answers are sometimes it depends, but it does really depend. It depends on whether you've got a local Democratic Party that's open to creative ideas, that's open to you organizing some adjunct efforts. It depends if they're interested in building relationships. We have heard wildly different stories, everything from indivisible leaders, being very much unwelcome by very alarmed kind of old boys networks in Democratic parties to indivisible leaders getting recruited to become the new head of the local Democratic Party. So some of it just depends. I would say I would interact with them based on how effective they are. I would interact with them like many other grassroots local or groups, right? You're going to have in your community, you might have a local immigrant rights group, you might have a local racial justice group, you might have a local women's and or LGBT group. All of the you might have kind of general progressive organizing. All of those folks, you just want to be in relation with them, and the Democratic Party is one of the stakeholders that you want to be in touch with and strengthening or and working with if they are good to work with.
We got a couple questions both live and ahead of time, and I'll just paraphrase because there were a whole bunch that came in asking about how do we gather and organize online. So this is an example of something we're experimenting with doing these live Q&A chats. But one thing you'll notice if you follow Leah and I, we're basically off Twitter. We basically don't use it. We use it a little bit, but not very much. We spend far more time on Blue Sky, which I found to be a very welcoming environment and fewer trolls and fewer Nazis over there. There are also a lot more journalists and electeds there than there used to be. So it's a legitimately good replacement for Twitter, which frankly wasn't true a year ago, but now I feel like it really is. There
Yes.
isn't currently a real equivalent to like a Facebook where you can share your information to friends and family members. Blue Sky is different. It's a Twitter replacement. So that one of the challenges that we're facing now that we weren't facing as much in 2017 is our online systems are just worse. Twitter is garbage. Facebook has bent the knee to Donald Trump and Elon Musk. The ecosystem out there is pretty messy, and we're going to have to develop ways to talk to each other and share information. That's core to how we're going to organize. So I would, as a first step, highly recommend people get on Blue Sky, but as you're gathering with your indivisible group, you should be figuring out how is it that we're going to share information? Do we have an email list? Do we all set up a Slack? Do we set up a Discord? Do we have a group text chain? You're going to have Mastodon. I'm seeing over there is a good example. Spoutable. I've seen people go on that. The important thing, Signal is a good way
Signal.
to share. It's a good private way to share a group text chains. But this figuring out how you communicate is a core early activity you should cover in your new indivisible group, or if your indivisible group hasn't covered it yet.
That's right.
A couple miscellaneous questions. We actually got a question about the DNC. Question from Susan in Connecticut. How do we leverage or what leverage do we have with companies that are capitulating? Do boycotts work, or is there something else out there?
Yeah.
We've talked a lot about boycotts. We often get questions about big national strikes or boycotts, tactical based questions about how do we
Yeah.
respond to this kind of capitulation.
Yeah. It's a great question. The short version based on, and I actually have some experience working on corporate boycotts from my work in the human trafficking world. I think the general rule of thumb that I would have here is that some boycotts do work, but they have to be constructed in a way that delivers real and sustained harm to the company. I think what is not good and not helpful is boycotts that don't actually effectively hit the bottom line or that don't do that for the sustained period of time. And so we tend to be pretty hesitant about calling for or hopping on them, both because it's not our core theory of change. We're not, a corporate pressure entity, but also because we think that unless you've got a plan for how you're actually going to cut into their bottom line, you don't want to kind of announce a hit that's not going to do something meaningful that they're going to notice. So that is one of the challenges that we've faced with some of the big corporate billionaires that we're looking at. And also what feels real right now, what feels potential right now, is about building those alternate channels of communication so that it's less about boycotting X and more, well, I mean, it's a little about boycotting X, but it's actually about creating a healthier and more functional place where you want to be on blue sky as much as it is about leaving X. And that, I think, is going to be a really important part of the coming years, is creating those alternate spaces, alternate communities, alternate infrastructure that we control or that is not open to control by billionaires, where we can collectively thrive and we can create healthier spaces.
Yep, I will say I am interested in some tactics around just boycotting Amazon in some way. If there are
Yeah.
ways, if there are brilliant ideas people have for how we can push back against Bezos' economic and political power, I'm all ears. Um, we've gotten a couple questions in the chat about, hey, I want to find my local Indivisible group. Awesome. We want you to find your local Indivisible group too. If you go to indivisible.org, you can find there's a whole map and you can search the map. I will say we are in the midst of a map-wide census where we're going through and making sure every group on the map is indeed an active local group. That should be completed this month. So if you find a group and you're like, they're not responsive or they don't seem to be very active, that might be true because we're updating the map now. And if you don't find a group, you're like, oh, there's not one really close by to me. Hey, good news. You're going to be an Indivisible group leader now. You get to start your own and we'll help you do it. We want you to do it. There are resources and trainings and supports that we provide so that you can actually do that. But you should feel free to start your own. The way every single Indivisible group that's on that map was founded was people did this. I just raised their hand and they decided to start their Indivisible group. And so we want you to do that. Um, okay, so we are about 10 after. A question that we often get in these chats, especially post-election, is how do we maintain hope given everything that is coming? Um, Leah, do you want
Yeah.
to talk about like how we are seeing engaged in this area? And I just want to note, big shout out to Leah's mom, who is with our 4-year-old right now, and the door is not locked, and somehow he did not run into this room screaming.
I
So,
locked the door.
okay, never mind. Leah locked the door, but Sarah Anderson, anyway, she is looking after Zeke right now, which is great.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I'm encouraging folks to think about this as a collaborative exercise. So I'm just going to ask folks to put in the chat,
Oh, I like it.
what gives you hope or what are you fighting for? Whichever of those resonates more with you right now.
Hope equals the
Yeah,
number of
put it in
people
the
on
chat.
this call. I love that. Survival, indeed.
Survival community.
My daughter. Gosh, it is interesting. One of the main things that's different now for us compared to 8 years ago is we have two kids. We have a 4-year-old and a 2-year-old now, and the threat of the Trump administration really hits harder.
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
look at this! What everybody, oh, Leah, what a great prompt! What a great
I think,
prompt!
well, I was gonna cheat and say it's the folks on this call that give me hope because I have seen what folks on this call, what a nationwide movement can do, how we can transform what is politically possible in this country. We have done it before. We are mad as hell that we have to do it again right now, but we're gonna do it again, guys. So thank you for being here. Thank you for everything you are doing. I know that the collective magnitude and creativity and determination of the people on this conversation, on this call, in this movement is mind-boggling and beautiful. Something horrible is happening right now in this country, but something beautiful is happening too. So we're gonna stay all in.
Oh, I can't top that. That was a beautiful closing, Leah. Y'all, hopefully we'll see some of you next week on Thursday. Hope you can come, send more questions. We'll get to as many as we can. Send this out. Send it to people. Say, hey, we joined this great call. Do you want to ask questions about how we fight back wherever you are? We want more people. We want to be welcoming to new people. So please help us build this up, and hope to see y'all in a week. Thank you all. We'll see you soon. Ugh, love all this feedback.